Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are back to paint Shreve the Inquisitor. Now, if you've ever, had the idea that something about someone you just met looks a little bit off-putting, just a little bit like they might be involved in a cult of some kind, this model surely sets all of those bells off because he's got every single cult-related trope you can imagine. So I imagine this model saw a lot of use in either Warhammer missions or themed or narrative battle reports or any number of D&D even campaigns where you really needed somebody to 100% be completely not a cultist. Because just look at this guy, right, with his outfit, with his robes, his slightly dubiously shaped cowl, no alarm bells to set off there. The fact that he seems to be curiously into flames, seems to like his flames just a bit too much, has a big strange book that he seems to be very committed to finishing, and he's got lots of little knives and lots of paraphernalia, scrolls and such around his person. Seems to refer to those quite a bit for doing even the most basic of tasks. A little bit like Homer Simpson turning his TV on with his gun for that episode where he got a pistol. So yeah, this miniature lives on rent-free in the minds of lots of people who are into these kinds of missions because demonic summoning, rituals, that sort of thing, evil behavior was a real kind of cornerstone of early Warhammer. It was just something that you would try to be working to prevent, whether you were doing it in Warhammer Quest, whether you were kind of committed to doing this on a kind of narrative battle report, or else you were just trying to work through it in your RPG campaigns. So Shreve the Inquisitor hit all of those notes. Now, he was released in 1987 together with an entire batch of Chaos and Chaos-themed sorcerers, and in that sense, he was probably the most popular out of the entire bunch. Certain other ones live on in the memory today, like Stab the Acolyte, for example. But yeah, Stab the Acolyte, Shreve the Inquisitor definitely has his place up there, together with the most memorable of Chaos miniatures of its time. So with that in mind, looking at the paint job that you already see me slapping on in front of you, what I'm trying to do is to do him in a little bit more of an unusual color scheme. I like the idea of cultists being like dressed in red and black and bone and all that kind of thing. But maybe I was thinking what we would try to do was to have a little bit more of a subtle origin to his cult. Maybe this guy is a member of the cult of Dagon or similar, something a little bit more Cthulhu-like, but definitely giving lots of unpleasant, unsafe vibes. I think that's really what we want our color schemes to do. So with this in mind, I started off with I think it's Croxigor scale, which is a really nice kind of teal color. Teal is, as a non-primary color, I think what it does is it gives off the vibes of being either not straightforward or not entirely honest, as opposed to a color like say red, where it's kind of wearing its heart on its sleeve, so to speak. I think colors like teal, which are kind of in between more familiar colors, more familiar primary colors, I think they tend to give off the vibe of something that's a little bit not quite as it seems. And that's just the kind of suggestion that I think Shreve needs to set off some of the really nice details on this miniature. So yeah, Croxigor scales. What you see me doing now is applying the initial coat and then coming back in for a second go to deepen some of the recesses, leaving the lighter raised areas alone, because we want as much of that temperature, well, that sort of saturation difference that we get when we are working with translucent paints like contrast, like Citadel contrast, or express color, or speed paints. So you want to let this sort of have an overall pass, let that dry, establish your lightest tones, and then after that you come in and you sort of re-establish the darker areas, as well as clean up some of the areas that might look a little bit blotchy from the way it dries. But yeah, I'm really liking the way this Croxigor scale green is kind of turning out. It's sitting right on that cusp of green and blue, right? You can clearly see the green tones and you can clearly see the blue tones. I find a lot of the other colors in the range kind of straddle that line a little bit more closely. This one, I think, is just that perfect middle line between the two colors. So while that's drying, and it's already drying fairly quickly, which is nice, I'm jumping back in to detail the book that he's got holding, applying a little bit of skeleton horde on the pages, paying a special attention to the crinkly edges where you can sort of see that the sculptor has added quite a few lines to represent many pages, and then taking some of the excess off the flat face of the open page, because I think that's where we want to come in and add a little bit more of an interesting texture to represent maybe written words, that sort of thing. But yeah, definitely keeping the edges well lined and dark. Cool. So what will we pair with a teal color like this? So my idea is, if I'm going to be doing him sort of like a blue, sort of subtle kind of color, probably what I want to do is to lean into that a little bit more. So I'm going to grab Ethermatic Blue, which is again one of those really nice colors that, you know, sometimes can be hard to find use for in a miniature. Usually I think people use it for things like power weapons, you know, plasma, like cooling sleeves and so on plasma pistols. But other than that, it's kind of hard to find a use for such an unusual, unearthly looking color, unless you're painting lots and lots of ghosts, Nighthorn, that kind of thing. So I think this is actually a really fun time to use this color, to use it as cloth and to give it, you know, that to sort of sit side by side with Kroxigor scale, because I think that creates the perfect pairing of lighter and darker versions of teal, and of course extending that theme of being something slightly untrustworthy and a little bit hard to put your finger on. Is it green? Is it blue? Hard to say. So this goes on fairly simply over all of the details of his hood, as well as most likely on his gloves, because, well, I mean, if you're going to use a color in one spot, you might as well use it in multiple spots in smaller arrangements, because we run the risk of course, adding too many colors if we're not careful for a model that is as unusual as this. And already, you know, I can sort of see this model having quite an interesting vibe just by using these two very non-standard Chaos Sorcerer colors, and that really sets us up the opportunity to do something really interesting with that flame on his brazier that he's holding. It's kind of almost Statue of Liberty like when you think about it, right? Because he's got the book instead of the scroll, but he does have something that looks like the Statue of Liberty's torch, which is kind of cute. I like that idea. So he's got a little bit of that sort of, I don't know, Indiana Jones Temple of Doom sort of vibe. Everything about this guy screams out somebody that you wouldn't want to trust, but which you can see obviously has influence over others, or would have influence over others. Slightly slimy, slightly conniving, dangerous person to know, and I think that's exactly where we want this color scheme to express, to sort of like bring out. Now he's actually got little bits of underrobes as well. I think that's an opportunity really to add a color that contrasts quite strongly. I think this is that tipping point where we've covered most of the model in this sort of bluish teal. I think this is where we want to start looking for counterpoints to the color, because the danger is that the model comes across looking a little bit too same, a little bit too matchy, and it can kind of look very, I guess, a little bit boring to the eye. So the natural counterpoint to this teal color, and I think maybe our choice for the flames, I want to go into something that looks a little bit more like magenta, purple, because we are beginning to suggest that somebody might be dabbling a little bit in, you know, some of the great deceivers plots and paths. he's kind of got the pink fire going of Zinj, that is. And I really like that sort of straying a little bit too close to somebody being, and like just almost definitely being a little bit in over your head. And I really like that how that extends the story of chaos. The idea that everyone who seeks power through one of the chaos gods is almost it's 100% going to be in over his head or her head, as the case may be. So I really like the idea that we are beginning to suggest that something like that may be on the books. In an RPG sort of setting, you can almost imagine a wizard dabbling in these things, trafficking in like fetishes and little bits and bobs from unknown entities. And at some point, maybe something that happens that starts fairly innocuous grows into something a little bit more sinister. Maybe one day he's sort of meditating with a candle near him, and that flame takes on a distinctively pink hue, losing a lot of its warmth and having a little bit more of that sinister vibe. And maybe that's the first sign that perhaps you're dabbling with the changer of ways, you're dancing with the changer of ways, and you might be in a lot more trouble than you originally thought you were. And that's a really cool concept because, that sort of insidious nature of Zinj maybe gets a little underexplored in games like Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I think definitely it came out a lot more in games like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Wolfram, and potentially in Warhammer Quest as well, being as it was a way to explore the smaller stories of Warhammer, which was really a nice sort of thing to do, because Warhammer is, I think it was far too often expressed as a sort of national mobilization game where one entire culture would go to war against another, but you rarely got to see the insidious stuff going on behind the scenes, because that would be something that needed to be expressed in a smaller setting. So maybe Curse City might be a good way to explore these kinds of stories, although I think that sort of undead element is woven in a little bit too strongly into that. Warhammer Quest 1995 was a really wonderful way, a really wonderful place, a platform to explore stories like this, because it was so customizable. If you haven't played Warhammer Quest 95, I strongly suggest you give it a shot, just because it's so versatile and it's so built around the combat system that it's just begging to have that sort of narrative overlay woven into it. And when you put together a campaign of Warhammer Quest 95, you can really sort of decide how much you want to delve into just the battle aspect, just the facing opponents and beating them through feats of arms, or how much you want to delve into the storyline element that you could easily add via things like custom events, custom encounters and interactions, and of course having this guy at the head of the dastardly villains. And in that sense, he is the perfect cultist, in my opinion. That might just be the title of this video, because this is, in my opinion, the most cultist looking cultist you could get. And I mean that in a good way, because that, having a strong visual narrative and a strong pose and a strong concept behind his look really, really creates a very compelling miniature to paint. And as you can see, I'm having a lot of fun delving into his weird sort of like details and tropes and really bringing those to life with unusual colors. It's made me think of what color I would like to see on cultists in opposition to your Sigmarite cult, which is, the Sigmarite cult essentially wears all of the colors that you would expect to see on an evil cult. And I don't think that's by accident. That's kind of a cool bit of narrative design over there, because it's based on the Spanish Inquisition, right? So clearly you're not meant to trust either side of this equation. But in order for, I guess, the cult of Sigmar to feel justified in persecuting dangerous mutants and sorcerers and heretics, I think you really need to make the bad guys kind of read as extra bad, and in that sense, this guy reads as extra bad in the best possible way, and I love him for it. So yeah, really like the way he's shaping up. I am probably going to do most of these details in gold after the silver goes down, only because you want to have that sort of separation between the individual parts of the model so that it reads well from a distance. So I'm dropping in silver wherever I want the gold to be. Not sure whether he's got any real functioning, like working surfaces as far as metal is concerned on him. Almost everything seems decorative. Probably that sort of it's not a tabard. It's more like an armored sort of extension to his, like his crotch plate, I suppose. That armored crotch plate. I don't know. I ran out of euphemisms for describing that. So armored crotch plate it is. And I think that's it as far as metals are concerned. He's got armored feet, which are kind of cool. Implies he's wearing armor under his robes, as if he's always ready for a fight. Or could be early onset chaos armor, which was in the old rules. Armor that essentially grew organically over the person's body, over the chaos worshipper's body, eventually obviously marking them out as a worshipper of chaos. And you know, it will be integral to their form. They could never take it off, representing that imprisonment dimension. And I think in this era, most chaos miniatures had some form of armor. So seeing armor peek out from underneath, you know, the robes of a magister or a wizard or a sorceress character was not uncommon in the rules, of course. In 4th edition Warhammer, and in many editions beyond, actually Chaos Wizards always could wear armor. Minimally, they could wear Chaos armor, because Chaos armor sort of was something that you know, was integral to the concept and the design of imprisonment by Chaos, and therefore kind of added to that motif rather than diminishing it. Because as a general rule, nobody else could wear armor, right? No other wizards could wear armor. There were many workarounds, like, you know, some of them were talismans or arcane items that granted protective benefits, but yeah, none of them were actual real armor in the traditional sense. But Chaos Wizards could, and that kind of played a little bit into that image, as well as that trope of being imprisoned within your belief system. So yeah, I'm looking at adding a little bit of Sigvald Burgundy. This is the color that I'm currently using to shade the flame slightly. And then after that, we'll come back in and we'll brighten the tips. But yeah, just to add a little bit more saturation at the base, because Magos purple is not the strongest purple in the range. But at the same time, I wanted it to be fairly subtle. Yeah, cool. So I'm going to come in now with a bit of Gore Grunter fur to decorate the book. To detail the book. So I imagine this to be a sort of Necronomicon looking book. So this could be tanned flesh, leather, I suppose, something unsavory. And I like the fact that actually this book is fairly clean and low on details, because that really allows us to add our own touches if we so desire. For today though, I think I'm just going to make sure that I get a nice blend underneath that book. So adding this on, and then hopefully adding a bit more of a blend later. But for now, it's enough for us to get our base coat down. We can come back and deepen the shadows as we will a little bit later on. So I hope you guys are having a good day, night, evening. I don't know. These videos get watched by people all over the world. So far it's been an absolute blast producing them. I hope my English is not too indecipherable. I mean, I am a native English speaker, but where I come from in Singapore, this is not an uncommon accent. So I'm trying my best to speak as slowly and clearly as I can. I think I've had earlier videos where I've kind of just my way through it, and I hope that wasn't too disconcerting. I would like you to watch this without subtitles, simply because I think the whole concept behind these videos is that you use them to keep you company while you work on your own projects, right? And maybe you get to listen to me ramble a little bit. Whether that's a bonus or not, I think it's a matter of personal taste. But I will be happy if you did listen to this. I mean, um, and maybe pick up the occasional painting tip. But I think that's a little bit extra. If you do benefit from what I'm showing you, because to be fair, a lot of what I'm showing you is fairly straightforward, right? It's just a little bit of color theory and playing with colors as narrative tools to sort of extend the concept and theme of your miniatures. But I'm not doing really anything too complicated, like technique-wise. Although maybe it would help you be a little bit more efficient with the way you approach painting models, and maybe to give yourself a little bit of an easier time when it comes to worrying about aspects of color choice and so on. That's more what I'm interested in. So yeah, hopefully this is useful to you. So hopefully my accent isn't too bad. Hopefully it's not too indecipherable. But yeah, cool. I am now greatly wanting for this to be black. I think because I've got so many colors going on, I need an area of relative calm for the eye to light on. And also because I don't want people's eyes to be drawn too much to that shaft. I would be happy for it to be just a little bit more chill. So let's do it. Let's drop that onto here. As much as I rag on about people using black a little bit too much in the miniatures, because it essentially is a value, like color value black hole, literally desaturating the paint job. I do feel that you want to have at least one location on every model that is pure white and one location that is pure black. And the reason for this is I mean, it's as much for photography as anything else, because I think when you are trying to take pictures of your models, it helps that your ISO has something to focus on and to take reference from. So I enjoy finding a place somewhere on the model where it doesn't make too much narrative dissonance to add an area of pure black and an area of pure white, because I think cameras function better that way when they've got something to reference. So Shreve is looking pretty good, if I dare say so myself. Oh, I've forgotten his spikes. How could I have forgotten his precious spikes? So these spikes on his hat are what sell this model to me, because I think without them, he's kind of got a weird sort of Nightmare Before Christmas oogie boogie kind of vibe. Not I think the most interesting, but these spikes kind of make it for me, because it gives him that little bit of extra design oomph, right? It draws your eye to the model in a really interesting way. And back in 1987, I think, given that photography was not at its best, most of the time people would be looking at the miniatures in their blister packs. I think little touches and details like this really sold the model to people. They were really more important as visual design elements, more so than we would think. And therefore, I'm really glad that the sculptor went ahead and did something like that. Cool. I have realized there is a second scroll, so that gets the skeleton horde as well. This is just an example of when you shouldn't be messing too much with the color of something, because I think scrolls are, scrolls are scrolls. Wait, is that a scroll even? Okay, we'll call it a scroll, because there is a chance that that's the other half of this pouch. But it's okay, we'll leave it as such. Yeah. So I think the idea is that, yeah, scrolls are made of paper and or something papery, maybe vellum, which is a tan skin. So maybe the idea is that we want it to definitely read as something soft and fabric-like or papery. And sometimes when you choose a color that's very far from that, it kind of fails to capture that tactile kind of muscle memory that your viewer will have, and therefore they may misread it to be something else entirely. Maybe like a piece of wood or something, if you use a color that's a little bit too close to that. Just some thoughts. which is these videos in a nutshell, isn't it? Isn't it? Okay, so just a little bit more silver to clean up a little where I went overboard onto the edge with the Gorgrunter fur. And now I want to jump into adding a bit of silver, a bit of gold, because I think this will help us round off the color scheme to let us know how our color choices are going. As you can see, that little bit of gold has done wonders for the colors. I think it's added a lot of warmth to an area that was getting quite cold and wan and lacking in definition. Once you add in the gold, the warmth, you convey a bit of opulence, you convey some of the physical rewards, which I think, if you're trying to convert people over to your creepy chaos cult, you do need to show some of the trappings and some of the wealth and the power and some of the material benefit of going down this route. Certainly it will bring the wealthy and the powerful to your side. And then to others who are craving a little bit more of the desperation, the salvation, and answers to unspeakable needs, you would have your magical book and your strange brazier filled with sorcerous fire. And then your character sort of starts to flesh out as someone who misleads, who deceives, and who inveigles as we go through our entire cult vocabulary. Curiously, it says ASL. Welcome to this is the Friendster wizard, ICQ wizard, or CSI, GSI, CSI. It says CSI on his forehead. Okay, I didn't know someone was a fan, but there you go. CSI it is. Kind of awesome. Yeah. Well, that's one thing that's really cool about these early miniatures, right? Because I think the QC process, the sort of quality control process, it was more of a did John Blanche like your miniature kind of process, as I would imagine, or whoever it was that was overseeing the process, whether it was Brian Ansell or one of the other head honchos at Citadel. It was a case of whether or not they sort of saw value in the sculpt that you did. And sometimes you have sculptors who struggle to clear the bar at times a little bit, like the wonderful Gary Morley, who I have to be honest, I am his #1 fan. I love all the Gary Morley miniatures, although to be fair, so far I haven't yet had the chance to paint many of them. Maybe that will change. And of course, this process was less related, I feel, to trying to sell you more miniatures. I think it was more a case of did people connect with the story being told on these miniatures. And for me, the Citadel miniature series at this point definitely 100% connected with me, and that's why I'm painting models which were designed in 1987 or first released in 1987 today in 2024, and I think that's an awesome thing. So I've chosen to go for a bit of a non-standard look on the metals. So I'm doing gold again here, which is of course not going to surprise anyone, but I've also gone ahead and used Tyrant Blue, which is I think it's a very underutilized shade of blue, or at least I utilize it less often than I would. And this time I'm applying it to the metal because I kind of feel this blue tinge, this sort of indigo look, is incredibly appealing when applied over silver. I think it adds something completely different, something really quite arcane and different. And I'm sure every cult leader, not saying that's a potential career choice for any of us, I hope, but every potential miniature evil, like tiny chaos cult leader would want a little bit of this unusual kind of appearance to it, and that really brings out a little bit of this personality, which I really like. Oh, all right. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to jump on to detailing, I think, his clothing a little bit more. So with that in mind, I've picked out a little bit of just straight white. I think when it comes to highlighting this color, I'm not using my regular silver gray because I think that's a little bit too desaturated. I think I want his hood to get real bright real quick at the apex of his hood, really draw the eye there. And to that end, using a more desaturated color to highlight this is not the way to go, not the move in my opinion. So yep, pure white it is. And I think that really serves to sharpen some of these areas, make them really look like they have an edge to them and come to a strong point. I think that refines the real sort of, I mean, if you had to wear an item of clothing that really brings across the pyramid scheme nature of cults, I think this would be the outfit, isn't it? Look at it, it comes to a nice point, and I think it really brings across that sort of apex really closely. So to reinforce that idea, what we're going to do is make sure that, you know, we've got a really nice bright highlight. So we're mixing the ethematic blue into the white, and that's giving us a really solid point to work towards. And I think that looks pretty good because it draws the eye to that point, really reinforces the theme, and works well with our colors. So other than that, making sure that there's a little bit of the highlight tone where it comes together. So you have that 1, 2, 3 kind of line, 1, 2, 3, to draw the eye towards this point at the bottom. And if ever there was a graphical way to represent how cults work, that's him at the apex, and that's us at the bottom. Pyramid scheme indeed. So one of the many ways that this miniature achieves all of that, all within its physical design, plus making him look like an angry banana, which I personally approve of. Cool. So a little bit, I think, on his fingers would not go amiss, just to define the knuckles a little bit, and to sort of refine some of the shapes of the highlights that might not be perfect from the wash or from the contrast paint. So a little bit more emphasis on the top row, as well as where the glove has major wrinkles that kind of meet at the top. Saddle of the thumb, always a good place to add a highlight. And on this side, I will definitely, most certainly, have not massacred his thumb with Gorgrunter fur. That's a really good way to touch that up. And a little bit more detail on some of his fingers. And I think that's good. Enough to be visible from the side, but not to be distracting. Tiny bit more at the top, at the apex of his hat, because, you know, now that I've waxed lyrical about the fact that he's wearing a literal pyramid, I really like the idea that this visually depicts the idea of a cult. And next, we just need to detail some of these little pouches. Let's reuse the Gorgrunter fur on the smallest of these over here, because Gorgrunter fur is really pretty strong and you really don't want it to dominate. It will dominate the color scheme given a chance. And then let's use some Nazdreg yellow, I think, to have a yellowish cast for this largish pouch over here. It's a very crinkly top. And if you apply this carefully, not saturating the surface too much, you can actually get quite a cool gradation of color without yet resorting to a highlight, so that will save us time. But yeah, you come back in and take some of the excess paint off, or even go over it with your thumb to give you that rudimentary highlight. And then lastly, we've got this giant pouch, maybe more burgundy. Mosaic Vault Burgundy, to tie it in with his sleeves. But this time I think we might go very dark so that it doesn't distract the eye. But I like the idea that somebody like this, a cult leader, who's really about their personal presence and their, personality and their charisma, would feel the need to carry so much junk into battle. So all of their little, yeah, good. So that vanishes quite nicely, because I didn't want it to be a major part of the color scheme. But yeah, just somebody like that who feels the need to carry so much junk into battle. It's just a real reminder that that's a human underneath that bizarre outfit and his cowl, and not, someone who's actually immune to everything and impervious to damage and so on. It's just a human putting on a facade. And ultimately, that's what cult leaders are. Humans putting on a facade. Cool. So we're going to jump in with a little bit of white to add to our Magos purple. We're going to go fairly bright on this because I think in order to achieve the look of flames, you do need to have quite a big jump in color. And then after that, we'll come in and we'll blend it together somewhat. I am kind of liking this subtle purple quite a bit. Again, not using any of the silver gray for the highlights because we want it to be as pure as possible, tending towards white. Don't want to add any desaturation at all because that will weaken the color greatly and sort of give the wrong impression. We want it to still look like it could be burning bright, even in the darkest of your crypts and dark places where cultists gather. Nasty, nasty guys. People you don't want to mess around with. People you don't want to encounter in the dead of night or in the dark places, the ungoverned places of the Warhammer world. Definitely not people you want to meet alone. Cool. So I think the last thing I want to do, because I think he's kind of getting there, looks wise. I want to come in and I want to re-establish stronger highlights on the Kroxigor scale garment. So let's kind of create like lines, just as the sculptor has envisioned, lines pointing towards that brazier that he's using to sort of darken up the bright places of the old world, as opposed to your regular braziers brightening up the dark places of the old world. So we're going to build highlights towards it, towards where the base of the torch hits his outfit, because I think that really sort of draws the eye in a very pleasing way towards that brazier. You could also do OSL for this, but I think for this stage it would be a case of getting it highlighted the way you want it to be highlighted first, and then after that we can come back in and add details like OSL later. For now, I just want to make sure that the miniature's details stand out as strongly as you can. Have some subtle blends, but nothing too time consuming to produce, because this miniature needs to find his way onto a table ASAP. I love him. He is just the creepiest. Right, so I think that's looking pretty good. Making sure that there's enough of a highlight on the top of the sleeve, which is also in this Kroxigor scale color. And the idea is that as you add white to this, it moves a little bit away from the ethematic green, which, as the name suggests, is a little bit more green. But yet they're close enough that they clearly look like that the two colors belong side by side in a very pleasing way. A little bit more on the sleeve over here, just to give it a bit of direction. I'm having a think about how I want to treat this area. Just very gently feather a highlight into his butt, I suppose. And then one more highlight, I think, just to bring us home. So one thing I've noticed is, if at first it doesn't look like it's blending well, go up one highlight band, go up one highlight tone, and suddenly the model will start to connect. Either that, or if it truly has gone beyond, the highest point that you want to have on your miniature, you can come back in and just apply a little bit of the original Croxigor scale to help blend it in. But I hope this has encouraged you to add Croxigor scale to your arsenal of colors, because it truly is a gorgeous color that behaves. It does everything that you want a contrast paint to do. It leaves beautiful mid-tones, it has dark shades which are really deep and intense, and it really can do wonders with the right kind of model. So I'm coming in to trim the highlights a bit, because as you can see, I clearly went a bit overboard accidentally while waxing lyrical about Croxigor scale. And then just to make sure that we enhance that blend from left to right, I'm going to come back in and just apply very thin Croxigor scale to blend that together. And I think he's looking pretty good. I've not bothered to highlight this side because I think I want all the attention to be focused on this end. And that is beginning to give us sort of the pre kind of notions of OSL. And then we can come back and add that in later. So his horns, I think, his spikes do need a bit more blue because they are fairly small, so the blue doesn't show as much. Just a little bit more emphasis there. And I think that looks pretty good. Another thing I want to do, now that I've noticed, is I want to put one more highlight on the right side of his hood. Like so. Feather off the end a little bit. Yep, that looks good. I want to add a little bit of detail to his book, because I like the idea that this guy, he comes into a room with like swishing robes and rustling pages. Just a real oral experience. And the crackle of flames from his brazier. There's so much going on here on this guy. Love him to bits. Okay, so highlighting the pages a little bit, and as you can see, because of how much of the book that you can actually see, that makes a big difference to the way that looks. Let's go right ahead and correspondingly add a bit of a highlight to his book, emphasizing specifically the corners. Might be a bit bright, but that's okay. We have Gorgrunter fur to spare. But maybe we don't need to. Don't mind how that looks. Just feather it in slightly. Make it look a bit pale and disturbing. And a little bit of white with Nazdreg yellow to really just light up this pouch. Remind you that despite being a dangerous and influential cult leader, he's felt the need to bring along all manner of protective, I would imagine, items to keep him away from the clutches of death. Sneaky cult leader. And there we go. I wonder if I could impinge a little bit more and work on adding some thin dark lines on his book, just to complete that handwritten look. So for this, I'm using just straight up black paint, no contrast here, and using the finest brush I can master, which is this one, which is a size 000 from Ashley nylon. Nothing special, but hopefully small enough to do the job. So tease it, really roll it into a really fine point, and then very carefully stipple words, or what look like words, hopefully. Mixture of long lines as well as some dashes, trying to keep them evenly spaced if possible. But really, I don't imagine cult leaders have the best handwriting, so I really wouldn't worry about getting it perfect too much. And then doing the same thing on the other side. Unless you're trying to suggest that he hasn't finished writing the page or taking the notes, in which case you could leave it half written. He's recording his observations as he goes along, maybe for one nasty experiment or similar, or maybe even keeping a tally of the number of his followers, or just reading a ledger, just a casual demonic ledger. Nothing sinister here. Okay, so one last thing. Again, another last thing is to come back in with a little bit of Magos Purple to help blend that highlight in, because it did go on a little bit strong. And yeah, that helps it to sit better. So that's it, guys. That's Shreve the Inquisitor. An absolutely lovely model. One of my favorites from this range. Way back in 1987, cults were ruled in style, as you can see. Alright, have a good one. Enjoy yourselves. And I'll catch you again soon. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Cheers. Bye-bye.